Hey everyone, and welcome back. I'm Rick Fussell and this is the Ingrain Workshop. In today's video we're going to be doing a DIY project. A couple of weeks ago I was able to acquire a 1999 Club Car golf cart. Now it will crank but not run. So in today's video we're going to be doing a complete overhaul to see if we can get the golf cart to actually run. That's coming up next here at the Ingrain Workshop. So the first thing I do before I check, there are three things that you need for an engine to run, and that's air, fire, and fuel. But before we check those three things, I'm going to take the head off the lifters and check the spacing on the lifters to make sure they're spaced. They're supposed to be spaced at a 60 or 6 thousandths of an inch, which is 0.006 with a feeler gauge. So I'm going to crack open these 10mm bolts. There's one on the top, one on the bottom, and that'll take the valve cover off, and then we'll adjust the valves. So you probably can't see it on the video, but that's 6 thousandths of an inch feeler gauge. So I'm just going to check here between the top of the valve to see if I've got the proper spacing. And this one appears to be loose, and this one is just too tight. So what we're going to do is there's I believe a 9mm nut on top of the two valves. We're going to loosen those, and then we're going to set the spacing on the valves. So with the two nuts loosened, there is a square bolt on top of the valve that loosens the stem, and this shortens the distance or extends the distance between the valve, which the valve can only move a certain amount of space when it's running. So with a crescent wrench, I'm just going to loosen this. And again, I'm just going to loosen it until I can get the feeler gauge in here. And I apologize, I probably don't know the correct terminology for a lot of these parts because I'm not a mechanic by trade. So now I've got the proper spacing here on the right valve. Now I just need to repeat this process for the left valve. So now with the valves properly spaced, both the intake and exhaust valves are now spaced at 6 thousandths of an inch. I'm now going to turn my attention to the air box over here, and we're going to go ahead and clean out the air box and change the air filter. So this is the air box, and you have an outlet off the air box that feeds air into the carburetor. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove this clamp on this end of the air box with a pair of channel lock pliers. And then you've got two quick release clamps here that you just release, and that should open the air box. And this is the filter. It doesn't look that bad, but we're going to go ahead and replace it. But before I do, I am going to take some compressed air and blow out the air box. So I have the new air filter here. Now I like to go ahead and just write on the air filter today's date, so I'll know the next time I changed it, when I changed it. So it's a good idea just to go ahead and put the date on the filter itself, so you know how long it's been in. And then with the filter in, I'm just going to go ahead and fasten the clamps back down. And then I'm going to go ahead and, for right now, I'm just going to leave the hose off the outlet side of the air box, because I'm going to have to take the air hose off of the carburetor. And that's what we'll do next. So again, with just some channel locks, I'm going to take the hose clamp, squeeze it, and then pull it off the carburetor. And then it's best to go ahead and just examine the hose to make sure that you don't have any holes or leaks or cracks in the hose itself. This hose looks fairly good, so I'm not going to need to replace it. So I'm going to just sit this hose off to the side. So I think we're good on the air side. We still need to work on the fire and the fuel. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is pump out the gas that's been in the tank. I don't know how long it's been there, and while we do that, I'll go ahead and pump the gas out, and then we'll start replacing the fuel lines and put in new fuel filters. I believe the fuel pump is okay, but we'll test that just to make sure, and if not, we'll go ahead and replace the fuel pump as well. Now using a micro cloth taped around a piece of scrap wood, I'm going to stick this inside the tank and try to absorb what little bit of gas is left and try to clean out the tank. So using a 1/4-inch nut driver, I'm just going to go ahead and loosen the stainless steel band clamps and remove the fuel line from the actual gas tank. This is the shutoff valve for the gas tank. I've got it shut off, and then I've just got 2 band clamps from the gas tank to the first fuel filter. So I'm going to go ahead and replace these hoses along with the fuel filter. So just to keep things simple, I'm going to take the fuel line loose from the gas tank to the fuel filter, and then we'll replace the hoses in the fuel filter, and then we'll repeat this process for the fuel line going from the fuel pump to the carburetor. And again, I've written the date on the fuel filter, just like with the air filter. Okay, so there wasn't a band clamp or a hose clamp here at the fuel pump, so I went ahead and moved the band clamp or hose clamp down to that, and then just use a zip tie here at the fuel filter. That should suffice. Next thing we're going to do is take the fuel hose off of the fuel pump to the fuel filter and then to the carburetor. So now we've replaced the fuel line and filter from the gas tank to the fuel pump, and from the fuel pump to the carburetor. So we've got new hoses and new filters. The next thing we're going to do is off the fuel pump to the bottom of the engine, there was another hose. We're going to replace that hose. There's no fuel pump or no fuel filter in that hose. It just runs straight from the fuel pump to the engine block. Okay, so now all the fuel lines have been replaced. The only connection that isn't hooked up is here at the carburetor. So the next thing we're going to do is replace the carburetor. So there are two 10mm nuts that we're going to have to remove off the air inlet side of the carburetor. So the next thing you want to do is to make sure that our gasket appears to be okay here, but we're going to slide this off. But before we slide the carburetor off, on the throttle, we have to remove this Carter key underneath this pin and remove this pin, which will disconnect the throttle cable from the actual throttle. So there's the Carter key that's under the pin. The pin is just a plastic pin which has a hole in it for the Carter key. So we'll want to keep that together, and that's what holds the throttle cable to the actual throttle of the carburetor. Now we should be able to remove the carburetor from the motor. And there's the carburetor. You can see the gasket where the air intake manifold goes on. You've got your fuel overflow hose. Then on the back side, you have another gasket. Now you can unhook the spring to the throttle. This gasket appears to be pretty good. And then there's a gasket here on the actual engine. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that gasket. It looks like it's good. We should be able to reuse it. Okay, so I went to get the new carburetor, and I noticed that part of my order, I guess, included a new fuel pump. So what I'm going to do right now before I put on the new carburetor, I'm going to disconnect the 3 fuel hoses from the pump and install the new fuel pump and take the old one out. So the fuel pump is held in by 2 11mm nuts. So the fuel pump's off, and you can see the arrows on the fuel pump as far as the direction in which the fuel is flowing. So we'll be able to install our new pump in the same direction. So here's the new fuel pump, and you can see the arrows. So we're going to put this in this orientation. So we're pumping from the tank to the engine. Okay, now we have the fuel pump installed. So I'm going to go ahead and install the line from the fuel pump to the engine. And then the fuel pump that leads to the carburetor, which we have disconnected on the other end for right now. And then to the actual gas tank. And just like that, we have all the fuel lines hooked back up to the fuel pump. So now we'll get back onto the carburetor. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is put the gasket up against the engine. And then the throttle cover will go on next. But there's a spring on the throttle cover. So there's a spring here on the throttle cover. That needs to go in the hole, the small hole here on top of the throttle, like so. And then you can see on the inside of the throttle cover there's a gasket. We're going to reuse that gasket. That seems to be in really good shape. So I've got the gasket up against the engine already. So what we're going to do is insert both the carburetor and the throttle cover on the engine at the same time. So now we've got two gaskets, one that's up against the engine and the throttle cover, and then one that's on the other side of the throttle cover and sits behind the carburetor. Now, before we install the final gasket, we need to take the throttle pin, which we took out earlier, which is the plastic pin, and then it has a Carter key that holds it in place. If you notice the stamp mark on top of the pin, there's a line and the hole is perpendicular to the line, so that makes it easy to find the hole. So we're going to put our throttle cable back on the throttle. Then insert our throttle pin. And then our Carter key. So now we have the throttle pin, throttle cable is connected now to the throttle. So then the last thing we're going to do is install the final gasket. There's three holes. The hole in the extra hole needs to be in the upper right, and that will go up against the carburetor, and then the air intake will go over that, and then we'll reinstall our two 10mm nuts. Now you want to be careful tightening these because this air intake on the throttle is just plastic, and the last thing you want to do is crack that plastic. So just go ahead and snug it up. You don't have to put the Gorilla on it. And again, just snug it up. And then the last thing we need to do is connect our air intake hose from the air box to the carburetor. So up into this point, we've adjusted the valves to 0.6 of an inch. We've drained the gas tank. We've replaced all the fuel lines and fuel filters. We've replaced the fuel pump. We've cleaned out the air box, and then we've replaced the air filter with a new air filter. We've replaced the carburetor in two of the gaskets, not all three of them. And then the last thing we're going to do is for our spark, we're going to change our spark plug, and then we're going to put on a new oil filter and change the oil, and then we'll crank it up and see if we can get this thing to work. I forgot to video it, but you'll have to reinstall the fuel line here at the carburetor. And then that's it for the spark plug replacement. The only thing left to do, there's a drain plug at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and drain the fuel, or drain the oil, and then change the oil filter. So I have the golf cart up on some ramps. The oil filter is right here. I'm going to take the oil filter loose, and then there's a, I believe a 9/16 inch drain plug, but I'll double check that here in a minute, and then we'll go ahead and drain the oil out of it. The oil didn't look too bad, but might as well go ahead and change it just to be on the safe side. Okay, so there's a switch right here that you can pull out, rotate 180 degrees, and that puts it in service mode. And that's what I have the cart in right now, is service mode. That way I can crank it up and it's in neutral, it's not going to move forward. That way I can see if not only the engine's cranking, but it actually starts to run. Now, off camera, I went ahead and gave it some gas and got fuel pumping through the fuel lines. So I know it's got fuel, so hopefully it should fire up, not only crank, but actually run. So let's give it a shot. So that's working perfect. I think that did the trick. I didn't have to choke it, didn't have to do anything. I think the carburetor is good to go now. The fuel lines, the oil change. This is a new golf cart now, and I hope to get a lot of good use out of it. Well, that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you really enjoyed the video and you got something out of it. If you did, then please leave it a like. If you're new to the channel and you like DIY and woodworking projects, then I highly recommend that you smash that subscribe button. It's free and painless, and I also ask that you ring that bell icon. That way you'll be notified of all our upcoming videos. To all my existing subscribers, I really appreciate all the support that you give in this channel. I'll leave links in the video description below to where you can pick up the kits that I used for this rebuild. And again, I think it cost around $75, so it was well worth the investment to now have a golf cart that runs. I'll also be doing future videos because I do plan on painting it. Who knows, if the supervisor gives me her approval, I'll probably go ahead and put a 6-inch lift kit on it. Fingers crossed. But stay tuned for those videos. I'm Rick with the Ingrain Workshop. Until next time, have a wonderful day and God bless.